Hello.
Hello.
Background is so weird. My hair.
Nice to see you. And people are coming on as we speak.
Awesome.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. You know, the bummer about webinars is we can't see anybody else.
I know.
Hello to everybody who is joining, and we're a few minutes early, so we'll get going. Get going right on time today. Happy spring to everybody. I'm ready for some warmer weather.
We never really have the colder weather. A little bit here and there, but it's time.
Well, while we're waiting, we have a lot of exciting things going on at the council. So hopefully everybody will check out their emails over the next couple of days, because later today, we're going to hit send on our email with our latest edition of Accessories Magazine, which is our Mother's Day gift guide. So fun assortment of brands and ideas for mom or that special lady in your life. And then our ACE Award announcement is going to be out later this afternoon too. So I know it's exciting. We're going to give away 9 of our winners.
I'm glad I'm coming before that and I don't have to follow that.
You're much more, much more important. For the moment. We have a lot of people signed up today, and based on the world, I think really important to hear everything that you've learned and your insights. It's so valuable. Anyway, so we're going to announce our ACE Awards winners, and then of course our ACE Awards this year is on May 3rd, which is a Wednesday. And many people have asked us, didn't we just go to an ACE Awards? It was in August.
Inching back.
We for many years had intended to have the ACE Awards in the spring, in May. And the pandemic kind of threw a wrench in that. And, it got us a couple years just because we couldn't get together when we wanted to. And then, the venues weren't available when we wanted them to be. So this is hopefully the start of our permanent, foundation for where the event will be going forward. But it is on the 3rd of May. And, we have a really exciting lineup this year of mainly American founded companies, American brands, rich heritage, anniversaries. I'll give you a few of the anniversaries. The Echo design at Echo New York, 100 years, family-owned company for 100 years. How impressive is that? Judith Lieber is celebrating their 60th anniversary, female-founded company, making beautiful handbags for 60 years. We have Wolverine, who has a 140th anniversary. These are pretty amazing milestones. So we really want to just kind of stop and celebrate. We have the House of LR&C. If you don't know who they are, look them up, because the House of LR&C comes with some really cool founders. So I'll let you do a little Googling on that, but it's really about sustainability and about founding a company from the beginning with, forward thinking, sourcing, and, it's not just sourcing, it's the way the whole company is set up, from diversity to, doing good things along the way. So we're excited about them. We have Fashion File, one of the premier resale sites. Their verification system is remarkable. If you haven't been in there,
the showroom was incredible. Like looking down those aisles of bags. Oh my God.
Oh my gosh, it's like, you know, it's one of the most extraordinary collections of designer bags in one place that I have ever seen anywhere. And they have just such a nice way of doing, doing business and resale. So we're going to be celebrating them. And we've got a few other surprises up our sleeve. So you'll see about them soon. So anyway, hopefully everybody gets our emails every Tuesday. We try not to send out a lot. This week, we're going to send out a few more, but every Tuesday in our emails, we have events, programs like this one, or other educational events or opportunities. Most of them are complimentary for our members. We encourage you to sign up and participate. We have editorial requests for our magazine. We pretty much every week have a different editorial request in there. Submit your items. We like to, we like to feature as many brands as we can every time we put out an issue. Our accessories magazine, we're calling it AC magazine, is digital. It's quarterly. It's shoppable. The links go right to your site. So definitely participate in that. We have a new issue coming out on April 5th is our next new issue. What else? I don't know. We got a lot going on right now. So if you're not a member and you want to be a member, we'd love to talk to you. Just shoot me an email and we can get that set up. Okay. For the presentation today, Beth will present. If you have questions, you can put them into the chat. You can raise your hand. You can put them into the comment. We will try to get to as many of them as we possibly can. And Beth Goldstein, thank you for joining us today. Beth is been on our board of directors now for a number of years and is now speaking for the new Circana. I will let you, talk a little bit about your new name and what the merger has brought to this, to your organization, which is just an exciting and even more in-depth insight as to what's happening at the world at large. So, Beth, there you go. Should be able to share your screen and we'll get you going.
Okay, does that look good?
It's blank. Oh, there you go. There you go.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks, Karen, and thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. As you mentioned, you'll be seeing some of our new graphics, a little bit of a mix of the new Circana graphics, as well as some of the old NPD graphics as we work to transition everything, which is quite an undertaking. So thanks for joining me. State of Retail in 2023. As Karen mentioned, we are now Circana. NPD and IRI, which was a market insights firm primarily in the consumer packaged goods and grocery space, we merged last year and have recently rebranded the total company as the new combined company as Circana. And that name, there's a lot that came behind it with the branding work that was done, but essentially it is meant to represent the fact that we now track the complete view of the consumer spend and, are doing the full circle of turning complexity into clarity. So that is our tagline. Here's a little bit about me. I'm not going to go through all these details, but for those that I haven't met, I would love to connect, whether it's on LinkedIn or if you can find me on Twitter. But I'm the footwear and accessories analyst for the NPD Group. I've got a little bit more than 20 years expertise at NPD, but also working in retail at the beginning of my career. And as Karen mentioned, I've been on the board of the Accessories Council for a number of years. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start big. We'll talk about retail across industries, across some of the new industries that we have access to at this point. And then we'll come down and just give a little bit of overview of what's happening in accessories and footwear. And then I want to talk about what's happening with the consumer, because that's really what it's all about. And consumers are settling into new lifestyles. Not that that doesn't mean they're not, continuing to evolve, but those new lifestyles come with new priorities. And we're seeing some of this play out in the data in terms of what's doing well, what's struggling, where consumers are shifting their spend. And then we'll wrap it up. We'll look ahead and I can take some questions. And like Karen said, feel free to pop questions in the chat and she can interrupt me at any point. So let's talk about the big picture. So consumers have certainly been feeling the pressure for the last 6 to 12 months. This is just the overview of what industries we now have access to. Some of these are completely new. At NPD, we were not covering any of these. Some of them are fill-ins to some of the areas that we were tracking. So for example, with Complete Beauty and Health, NPD always tracked the prestige side of the market, and IRI was more the food, drug, mass. So now together, that's a very powerful view of that industry. Food is a similar situation. So in fashion, nothing is going to change imminently other than the fact that we now have a broader view of what consumers are spending their money on across industries, so we can understand how that impacts the fashion categories. So speaking of all of these industries, here, this is a list. This is that $2.9 trillion that you just saw on the prior slide, up 5% in 2022 versus 2021. A lot of this was due to dollar price growth, so average price growth. So beauty is really the anomaly in that it's been the star industry where units and dollars have been growing, and there's actually been little price change. Whereas in many other industries like that food and beverage, so look at that $863 billion number there, that is huge. And it dwarfs the size of, the next largest is food service, which is also up considerably. Then you've got apparel down a little bit below, which are the biggest industries. But consumers are spending more on their food and beverage, their grocery. They're spending more when they're going to food service establishments. They are spending more on footwear and about flat on accessories. But what's happening here is, particularly on footwear, this is being driven by average price and units are down. And that's for the most part the case with accessories as well. It's the case with most of these categories. So that means demand is still soft. And we see that this is now just the general merchandise categories that were more the traditional NPD tracked categories. But you can see that in the past year, this goes from basically the beginning of March all the way back a year, we haven't seen many positive weeks in units or dollars. There's been a few, so maybe some of those big promotional weeks like Prime Week last summer, and then that most recent one is December week 4, which was by far the biggest holiday week across industries. And that was really due to timing of the calendar, because Christmas fell on a Sunday. There was a full week between the prior Super Saturday and the holiday. And that's when, as much as the industry pushed the early shopping and the early promotions, as I expected, it came down to that last week, which really, at least in our categories, kept them pretty much flat for the season. They had been trending downward prior to that. So we'll see that same impact this year, because I think the holiday Christmas is on a Monday. So that gives us even a full weekend before the holiday starts to get that last minute shopping in. So we should be prepared for that. But demand, it remains soft coming into the beginning of 2023 as well. A lot of headlines out there that I'm sure everybody's following, and it may impact some of you out there as well. Of course, a lot of layoffs from corporate offices to store positions, manufacturers, retailers. It's really happening across the spectrum, and it's not just one segment. It's happening. There's some luxury, there's some, lower end. So, that's been a big headline so far this year. store closures. So not only what's happening with Bed Bath & Beyond, some department stores have announced more closures. Some of it is just a continuation of things that were already announced. But like, for example, even Foot Locker this week announced, that they'll be closing unproductive stores, but they're also looking at new store formats and opening stores as well. So it really is, it's not all a negative. It's really a rebalancing of the portfolio and really looking at what makes sense. So also new formats. So some of the big retailers like Target, Macy's, DSW, looking at smaller footprint stores to better reflect how consumers are shopping, and off-mall as well. Foot Locker mentioned that too. So really trying to eliminate or diminish the reliance on the mall traffic, which is down, even though maybe it's improved from the height of the pandemic. Overall, on the long-term basis, continues to be down. There are also store openings. A lot of this is from the dollar store arena, but not exclusively. So I just mentioned Foot Locker, but Ralph Lauren also mentioned that they're opening 250 stores globally during the next 3 years. So, there are different things happening across the spectrum, and I think that makes sense. It's really the evolution of after a couple of trying years. I'll mention this later, but I, really viewing this in many aspects as a reset year for many areas of the business. Across industries, just if we take a look at which are the industries that are continuing to do well, which are maintaining their volume, and which are reducing. So we've got a couple of things at play here. So in terms of industries that grew in 2022 after also growing in 2021, accessories is on there. Now, accessories in this view is really just bags, small leather goods, and luggage, and this is being driven by luggage. So the bags categories and small leather goods are working their way back, but the growth has actually been driven by luggage and travel, and we'll talk about that. Apparel, toys, footwear, housewares, maintaining the volume. So grew in 2021 as some like housewares grew during the pandemic as well. Footwear was kind of a recovery depending on the category, and these have kind of stayed around flat in 2022. But in terms of dollars, units are a different story. And here are the industries that are reduced spend. And those are industries that were really the pandemic stars, right? These were super strong during the pandemic as people, bought new appliances, new coffee makers and air fryers and everything to outfit, their at-home setups and the tech setups and their exercise setups. So those are really strong during the pandemic. And now they're just declining from that, but still remain at these new levels that were set by the pandemic. If we looked at this chart in units, every industry except beauty would be in that reduced spend category. So that's just illustrating that softer demand that we're seeing. And average prices continue to grow. I mean, you've seen, you see headlines about inflation, and in some cases, okay, it's down a tick, but this is still increasing. Even though maybe inflation rates are starting to come down, that still means prices are growing, just not as at high of a rate. But we can see that we still see average price changes about 20% across the industries that we're tracking above 2019 levels, and that growth has slowed. And so last year, the growth in many of those industries wasn't quite as strong, but for the most part, look, beauty was the one I mentioned that is pretty much flat there, but all the other industries are seeing growth. And we had a couple of reasons for this throughout the pandemic, and I've crossed out a couple of them because they're no longer really applicable, because we saw prices increases not only from MSRP increases because of what was happening within the supply chain, but also because we had less promoting going on, because coming out of the pandemic, there was really strong demand in many industries and low supply. There was also less price sensitivity because many consumers came out of the pandemic with a lot of savings because they had received assistance from the government in terms of financial, and they hadn't spent. So, we saw that sort of dwindle throughout last year. And we saw the fact that we saw promotions really start to pick up. So we're actually still seeing the impacts of higher MSRPs, but we do really expect this to start to level off this year. And consumers are telling us that they're needing to pull back because of inflation. About 80% of consumers have told us this. Number one area to cut back is restaurant dining. So, we're seeing that translate into that increased spend in the food and beverage, even though consumers have to pay more there as well. It is still considerably less expensive to have your meals at home. Apparel is the next area to cut back on. Fashion accessories is up there. Travel, which is interesting because that's sort of contrary to what we're seeing going on in the travel industry. So that we have to, just kind of take that with a grain of salt. But people are be traveling differently and placing different priorities on different areas of travel. And then footwear is about a third of consumers saying that they need to cut back. And we have seen the impacts of this across these industries. And it's not that the higher income ranges are doing great. I mean, they're going to be less impacted, but these income segments are also down in terms of their spend. There's actually, it's interesting, we're seeing one grouping really. I mean, you see some growth across most of the income ranges in dollars, but again, it's because people are buying less, but they're having to spend more. But in units, it's really down across the board, with the exception of this 100 to 150K. And you see that's the highest growth area in dollars as well. And that's really a result of that's millennials in there, and it's actually consumers with no children. So that's an interesting thread that we are seeing throughout, that families with kids are underperforming families without kids. And, that makes sense. And you can kind of see this throughout the industries here. Most are declining, but those that are growing, even accessories showing a little growth here in households with kids, but just not as strong as households without. That's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of mouths to feed, spending more money and not receiving the same kind of stimulus or child tax credit than they did in 2021. So it makes sense that those families are feeling the pinch a bit, and there really is there isn't too much relief in sight there. All right, so let's take a look at the industry and just very quick snapshot of what's happening. Here are the major categories that we're tracking. We're not covering, we may not be covering every category of the folks that are out there. I will also say that we are launching, Karen mentioned the April 5th magazine issue coming out. Last year, we had our annual NPD report in that issue. This year, we are pushing that to later in the year because we are coming out with a new data methodology in the next couple of months to track the accessories market. So we're excited to come back to you with that. So some of this data will change, but I will, give you kind of the lowdown of what we're tracking now. So when we combine these categories, athletic and leisure footwear is still by far the biggest category. Grew a little bit of growth last year, but was a little bit softer than the fashion footwear, which is a smaller category, but it was actually faster growing as consumers returned to those fashion categories because they had events to go to, like Ace or like weddings. And so, we saw growth also in the casual space, but the dress space actually was the fastest growing. Not necessarily back to 2019 levels, particularly in units, but, was a positive year for that category. You can see the rest of the categories here. Jewelry down a little bit. We saw spend shift a little bit from 2021. We actually saw most growth coming from rings and earrings, and those declined a bit this year, but we saw necklaces and bracelets grow. So maybe it was just more about being out and more visible and purchasing some of those categories. Bags, really, it's about hands-free, so backpacks, crossbody, some types of shoulder bags outperforming, and the designer space, and we'll talk about this in a minute. The designer space actually outperformed the balance this past year, or continued to. Really the main story, you can see the fastest growing category here is luggage. Small category in the grand scheme of things, but the return to travel really did bring the luggage category pretty much all the way back to where it was. So we need to think about that. Obviously, that's great for luggage makers, but for those of us that are in other categories, how do we kind of jump on that bandwagon? Small personal accessories, a little bit softer, but we're still seeing growth in like cell phone cases and smaller money pieces, which kind of align with the fact that, you're using your phone as your wallet a little bit more, maybe using some smaller bags. And so, those money pieces don't need to be as large. So luxury across industries, fairly strong and continue to outperform non-luxury. But a couple, there was some slowdown in growth from the prior year, but also throughout the year. So designer footwear pretty much kept up its growth, but designer handbags actually in the fourth quarter started to decline. Now the comps were very tough because growth had been very strong in that area in 2021. But that was the first time we had started to see some cracks in the surface there. But you're seeing luxury in other categories like fragrance and in home with some of those more high-end appliances, and even food and beverage with wine and beauty as well. This just illustrates the designer handbag and small personal accessories or small leather goods slow down. And it really was just driven by, I think, just diminishing demand. I think that the consumers that maybe that more aspirational consumer in this area was also starting to feel the pinch and needing to make choices. Interesting brand shifts in Q4 was when you started to see the a little bit more publicity around Balenciaga and some of those ads that were controversial. And so it fell out of the top growth brands in that quarter. And we also may see, this is hard to track, but some demand shifting to resale. Karen, you mentioned Fashion File earlier, doing great. And that Fashion File is in this grouping of fashion resellers. And here I'm not talking just about handbags because I can't get to that level, but I've grouped a couple of these fashion resale companies, and you can see growth, continues to be fairly strong here. I mean, the growth rates are slowing off of strong growth prior years, but still continuing to grow. And I thought it was interesting that the RealReal sent reminder that they're accepting bags in more conditions than ever. So fair condition is okay now because there's such high demand. So I think we see maybe some of the demand in the luxury market shifting over here as consumers are looking to save money, and they still want it, but they want to try to do this a little bit more economically, and so they'll accept a bag that's not in perfect condition. Okay, so in terms of lifestyles and priorities, so how we work, right? This is a continued topic of discussion, whether people are back in the office, not back in the office, hybrid. A lot of headlines right now about employers calling workers back to the office. But I do think we've kind of hit I don't know, I hate to use the term new normal, but I think we are almost there. And not that it's not going to continue to evolve a little bit more, but a couple of questions we asked. 30% of workers told us that they're working at home more days than they did pre-pandemic. Even if more of them have gone back to office versus last year, it's still more working at home versus pre-pandemic. And this does skew higher for those with higher households incomes, which makes sense. More of the white collar jobs have the ability to do this. And the office occupancy rates. I mean, I follow this data. I think it's fascinating. This is from Castle Systems. I probably showed this to you before. But looking at average office occupancy rates by week for 10 metro areas throughout the country, and the average occupancy hit about 50%, maybe at the end of January for the first time since the pandemic. So that was a big headline, but you really got to think about what that means. I mean, we're only at 50% of the offices being occupied, and for New York and San Francisco and DC, it's lower. So we still are seeing this remote working, and that's actually been a challenge for brick and mortar retail in the metro areas. That's starting to come back a bit as international travel comes back a bit, but there's a lot of empty office space that you're just talking about getting converted into housing. So I think this really dramatically is impacting what people are buying and wearing to work. And when they do go to work, their dress codes are largely casual. We just asked this question, we've asked it a few times, and we're getting very similar results in terms of in-person dress codes. So business casual at about 40% and casual about 35%. Of course, there's subjectivity there. That means what people think it means to them. We didn't give particular details when we asked the question. but that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of what you're wearing on your body in terms of apparel, and also on your feet and what you're carrying as well. And in terms of footwear, we have seen that consumers continue to tell us that casual sneakers or other casual footwear or athletic footwear are the top types of footwear that they tend to wear for work outside the home. In accessories, we've seen, or handbags, we've seen a couple of work-related silhouettes start to trend back again. Now, backpacks has been growing. Backpacks is up to 2019 as well, whereas the other two are not. But you see a little bit of recovery there, and with satchels, it was a little bit of stopping the bleeding this year. So maybe we're seeing a little bit of a turnaround as more women or consumers do go back to the workplace. They are coming back to some of these silhouettes, and the functionality is important because we have to think about what are they doing during that day, right? Are they also going to the gym? Are they going to meet friends after? Now that they're at times getting back to some pre-pandemic activities. The other aspect is more on the social and experiential. It ties into work a little bit because some of the same categories get affected, but this really, but I think I had this last time as well, and this is the data from last year. I haven't seen really any updated stats here, but we knew that 2022 was going to be a boom year for weddings and some other social occasions because of that pent up demand from the pandemic. So you can see that blip up to about 2.5 million weddings in 2022. That's coming down back to more normal levels in 23 and 24. So we did see that there really was an impact. I told you about women's fashion footwear and dress footwear, and it was really all about high heels, right? It wasn't just because women are now want dress footwear, they're buying lower heels to wear to the office. This was all about partying, and it was all about the high heels because of that. So high heels definitely continued to gain share. And we also saw evening bags continue to grow double digits. So very small category when we look at handbags, but definite strong growth. And in footwear, we saw the return to dress a little bit. So dress, during those peak months of the pandemic, dress had given up a lot of share to casual. The casual category, continued to grow while dress declined. And during this past year, dress gained back a little bit of that share, not all of it. Casual did not give back all of it. You've got some very strong brands in the fashion casual space, like Hey Dude and Crocs and UGG, and so we are, we're continuing to see that, but we saw some improvement on the dress. Now, moving forward, given all of this that I've just shown you, we may see a little bit more impact this year as we get into spring and summer and events as well, but I do not think that this is going to be a continual trend. I think we have seen, last year was a very strong replenishment and a kind of a back to that type of activity. And I think that will normalize a little bit and we'll sort of come back to the trends that were happening pre-pandemic, where casual and comfort and versatility was very important. Handbag usage. So this question I recently asked our consumer panel, and I'm putting it in this section because I actually asked them to eliminate, not think about what they're carrying to school or work, but what they're carrying for social occasions like gathering with friends, dining out, shopping, running errands, things like that. So my suspicion is that handbags are being carried less often, or traditional handbags, at least from just what I observe out there across consumer groups. So almost 60% of females said that they carry a handbag for these types of activities all the time. So that actually was a decent percent, about another quarter some of the time. But what was really telling was the age breakout here. So basically 35 plus, you've got, more, much higher versus the 18 to 34. So younger consumers are not carrying handbags all the time as much as older consumers. So I think this is something that as an industry, we need to really understand a little bit more about what are those priorities for these younger consumers and what are they carrying. And I'll show you. And how do we get back into the regular usage occasion for these younger women? So whereas shoulder bags are the type of handbag most likely to be carried by all women for just the 18 to 34 age group, The highest was small crossbody. So I kind of alluded that before. That's leading to smaller money pieces doing better. Basically, crossbodies that can fit your phone and maybe a few other things because you have what you need and you want your hands free. Younger women also over-index on backpacks and the fanny waist sling, and which is sort of another iteration of a crossbody, no longer just a fanny pack or a belt bag. And then also the kind of a smaller pieces like a chain wallet or, a clutch or a wristlet. So really just carrying, what they need. That's not to say they're not carrying. They're over-indexed a little bit on totes as well. So maybe that's a little bit of getting back to the office. So not that they're never carrying bigger bags, but I think this shows us a little bit of the priorities in terms of what they're carrying. Travel spend, this is important to look at. So this is credit card data for a number of these categories. Lodging was up versus 2019. Concerts or event spend was up. Everything really kind of dipped in November and December when consumers definitely pulled back on spend a bit. Airlines had been above 2019 levels for most, but dipped below in December 22. Maybe that had something to do with what went on with airlines. Cruises are down, but I do know that, they were up you can see through the second half of the year, cruising was up, spend on cruises. And from what I read, bookings are very strong for this year. So consumers returning to that form of travel. And I also like to track the mass transit, ride sharing, that kind of thing, because that tells me more about the commuting. And it also ties back into the return to work, and those are still down. Really some interesting things I read this week that New Jersey Transit, or not New Jersey Transit, a bus company that provides commuter service from New Jersey into New York City is shutting down because they just don't have the ridership anymore. And you see it, the subway ridership numbers are starting to come back, but still well below. So this is important to follow. In terms of travel, we are back to having a festival season. It's not quite as prominent as pre-pandemic, but I am starting to get the messages and see the advertising and see the posts. And I think this is a big opportunity, particularly for the bags, for apparel, really for all categories, but apparel, and bags in particular. So, the hands-free piece and the functionality and fashion that we can offer for consumers going into to festivals is because they don't want to be carrying a lot with them all day. So I think that's really important, and the marketing opportunities here are definitely important. There's a new trend. Some people call it bleisure. Some people call it blended travel. So the idea that with this hybrid work situation, or with more of these consumers working at home than they ever did in the past, that makes leisure travel easier. And I love this quote from the United Airlines CEO that says, "Every weekend can be a long weekend." And we actually just did a survey question that I just got the results back, that 85% of those consumers that said they had a hybrid work routine said that it has made it easier for them to travel for leisure in the last 12 months. So airlines, hotel companies, event companies are really taking notice of this. And I think accessories companies need to do so as well. So what does that consumer need for that long weekend where they're taking their work articles and their personal articles all together with them? Maybe even have the family in tow. Travel continues to come back. We see it. I don't put the slide in here, but the travel, the TSA passenger counts are back up pretty much to 2019 levels. But it was interesting when we looked in the fall, the peaks were at different times than they had been in the past, which relates back to that quote about, traveling and can be, every weekend can be a long weekend. 30% of consumers told us that they plan to travel for leisure in 2023 more than they did in 2022. About 12% said they plan to travel for business more than they did in 2022. This is sort of a slower road back. I think the U.S. Travel Association has some maybe a little bit more aggressive expectations on the return of business travel, but I think that's going to be slower and not come all the way back. And it's important to keep track of this because consumers do spend for travel. So maybe now where they're feeling pressure elsewhere, they maybe prioritize the travel versus the physical items for the travel. However, we learned very quickly that if consumers are not traveling or doing anything, then that's worse for the industry. So we still need to kind of entice them into buying products that make that trip easier, whether it's, versatile accessories or footwear. So if they're going to get the value, but they only need to bring one or two things with them from, those areas. But casual or athletic apparel and casual or athletic footwear are the top categories that consumers say they are going to buy for their travel that's coming up in the next 6 months. And you can see some of the other categories. The luggage is a little bit further down the list, which isn't surprising because it's a lower purchase frequency category. And interestingly, we're seeing some trends across industries. I love to relate these types of things to other industries. So travel books, unit sales are not back to where they were pre-pandemic, but they're climbing back. Was interesting was the priorities. So in 2021, growth in books about US travel were strong, whereas in 2022, it's been much more about European travel. So that kind of shows you where the consumer is in terms of their travel journey. Whereas was a little sticking more domestic last year, maybe branching out a little bit this year. In technology, you saw tech was one of the softest industries, but there's been a couple of things. Noise canceling headphones sales are up. Now, we can't attribute all of that to travel, but our analyst there does think that it is related a bit. But item tracker sales, I thought that was really interesting because that came along, particularly in the end of the year where luggage was, lost all over the place. People with item trackers knew where their luggage was. Now, maybe they couldn't get it back, which was super frustrating, but this is definitely something that is growing. And so we have to think about from the accessories industry, why don't we work that in to products, whether it's luggage, whether it's other travel bags, other travel accessories, or, figure out how to accessorize those item trackers themselves and make them, fashion items. And then in sports and outdoor, the big camping is still strong, but what's trending is more the accessories because people bought the tents and the big equipment in late 2020 and 2021 when that was, camping was a good option for travel. So now it's just continuing along in some of those accessories categories. And just within accessories and bags, overall, I showed you some of the silhouettes in handbags that were strong. You'll see a couple of them here as well, but luggage categories really top the list in terms of the top growth categories for overall bags and other accessories. Another area is how we take care of ourselves. So health and wellness becoming much more top of mind than ever before. I've got a couple of different survey results here. We asked, what are your health and wellness areas of focus for the year? And you can see the results. We've asked this question now 3 times. You can see the results. So food and diet and exercise remain the top areas of priority. However, their importance has declined a little bit in favor of other areas like sleep, work-life balance, skincare, comfortable clothing and footwear, and screen time. So consumers are sort of shifting their priorities here in terms of how they're practicing wellness. And here's another, this is a very recent question that we should, about 50% of consumers said that they are placing more emphasis on health and wellness compared to pre-pandemic. And some of the things that they've been doing to take care of themselves are similar to what you just saw on the other slide. Different choices were provided to them here, but the comfort, wardrobe, and clothes and shoes also popped up there. So I think that's really important to understand that, even as we've returned to a little bit more of the fashion and dress for those occasions, consumers are really still placing priority and importance on comfort. Sports and activities. We ask consumers what they're planning to engage in. So walking for exercise is number 1. Exercising with equipment in home or gym is number 2. And then you can see fitness classes a little bit further down the list. And then hiking and running or jogging. So some of these categories, like a hiking that really exploded in popularity during the pandemic is still up there as a top activity. maybe have a little less time to spend on some of these activities, but consumers are still planning on engaging in them. Gym spend is back up, so about 5% versus 2019. And what's interesting is that digital fitness spend is not down much, a little bit of a dip versus last year, but up 250% versus 2019. So people still have their digital fitness apps, and they're still spending there. So what it looks like is that in addition to work being hybrid, working out is also hybrid. I mean, I know from my own experience, I'm now going back to the gym a couple of days. I'll do a home workout once or twice, maybe I'll go outside depending on the weather. So it really is kind of, everything goes and more hybrid workout routines. I wanted to mention the walking category just because it's a good lesson for other categories as well. So dollars were up 5% in 2022 versus 2021, but up 56% versus 2019. So of course, very strong growth during the pandemic. So that slowed, but it's continuing to grow. And the communities are a part of that. So there's I'm not sure if people have heard of hot girl walks, hashtag videos on TikTok about these walking communities across cities. There's one in New York City. There's broader, like the Today Show's got their walking club. So communities are important. And then, it's important to think about, okay, what else do they need for their excursions aside from walking shoes? This is also a category that's getting a little bit of a technology upgrade. And so we really also are seeing, I mean, this is very easy to explain in footwear, but I think it does extend beyond to other categories. So the idea of performance features being carried beyond performance footwear. So this is a new shoe from Hoka. It's called the Transport. It is a performance commuting shoe is how they position it. So they list all the features, all the performance elements, all the performance fabrics or materials. And it's not something you might have thought of before. Same thing with a Kizik, where it's easy on, easy off, and other brands have started to come into this as well. So, that hands-free. So maybe when you are running through that airport, it's easy to get those shoes on and off. And then in accessories, a brand like Nomadic. I mean, this backpack, it looks very simple, but it's got all of these features, be water resistant, all the storage, hidden pockets, all of that. So expands to be bigger. So these idea of bringing the performance in. I know maybe thinking about some of the other categories of accessories, it's a little bit more of a stretch, but even in, in the jewelry space, in the cold weather space, what are those features that, you can bring forward that, are those performance features that will entice consumers into thinking that these are going to make their lives better. And then lastly, how we shop has been transformed. This is overall retail in terms of online versus in-store. That's what I'll focus on here. Prior to the pandemic, in-store was almost 70% of the sales. Then it went down to less than 50. Now it's back to, in the mid 50s. So, starting to come back, but still not to where it was in the online business is, 14 points higher than where it was overall. And we're seeing those same patterns in footwear and accessories. Now, actually, what we see here is a complete leveling out. We actually haven't seen the penetration start to skew back towards the stores. It's really been since 2020, and they leveled out in 2021. 2022 was really the same. So moving forward into this year, do I expect a little bit of a dip in this penetration in favor of stores? Yeah, I think so. But we also are seeing direct consumer really driving a lot of this online penetration. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a slow road back to stores, and we're going to still hover well above pandemic levels of penetration. We're not going to go all the way back. And consumers like shopping one way or the other. Some of these questions, the next few slides that I'll show you, are related to footwear, but I do believe that they translate. Why do consumers shop in store? They want to try on, they want to touch and feel, they want to leave the same day with the items. They would like to just browse. That's what they like about shopping in stores. Online, it's more about convenience. It's easier to search, product selection, finding sales and discounts. Don't have to worry about, whether you're going to have your size or, the color you want in the store if you make the trip. So I think these are what you would expect, but I like having these laid out because it really reiterates why we need to continue to blend the best of both of these worlds within reason. It's going to be hard to create that touch and feel that consumers like in store, in the online experience, but we can continue to improve on the technology, on the visuals and the video and the, maybe it's augmented reality where you can see something on yourself. And making online easier to shop. People like to browse in stores. How to create that environment more online as opposed to just scrolling through a flat, page of endless product. So definitely work has been done, but more work to do here. Social media has emerged as a new channel. Now, it is related to the online channel, but it also is, it's driving in-store sales as well. Because it's really just highlighting the brands and the products and the retailers that consumers, want to get in and what's going viral. So it's really been very impactful for younger consumers. Not surprising, the younger the consumer, the higher the percent of them that use social media to learn or discover. But what I think is really interesting here is just the increase that we're seeing in the importance of TikTok. And of course, that's a little bit of concern out there now in terms of what's going on. I think there's hearings going on today in Congress about TikTok and what's the future. So that's going to be important because that's become a huge driver of trends. And it's the new impulse. So whether or not you can actually just click and buy, which social media platforms are working on, continuing to improve that experience, but it's driving the impulse purchase. We're less time in the store now, so that impulse is not as easy. That impulse purchase is not as easy to drive. But over 1/3 of 18 to 24-year-olds said that they had made unplanned fashion and beauty purchases while scrolling through social media. And most of them say they'll do it again. So really, this is the new way of capturing that impulse purchase. So we've got to make it a better, more seamless experience. But interestingly, there's also some negative anti-influencer sentiment out there. We asked about sponsored versus non-sponsored posts, and sponsored posts tend to have more of a positive impact than a negative impact, particularly for Gen Z and millennials. But these age groups also index higher on negative impact than other age groups. So that's definitely something to watch. And there's this kind of growing trend toward anti-influencing, which is a lot about recommending other products that aren't as expensive. So that is also influencing, but just definitely something to keep in mind. And a lot of it is about dupes, right? So the trend toward dupes. And in some areas like beauty, this is huge in beauty, and it's really about suggesting products that are, legitimate branded products, but just maybe a mass version or drugstore version rather than the high-end department store version. In footwear and accessories, it's actually a lot about total fakes. And so, I'm sure that's keeping legal teams quite busy. I mean, this always existed, right? It's nothing new. It's just that it's so much more out there now, and it's for everyone to see. So and it's not just for designer, right? I see articles with the best Lululemon belt bag dupes. That's obviously a very popular item, and it's not particularly expensive, but there were supply issues with it, and there were suggestions on what could be the duplicates for that. So I think this is a really interesting trend that we're seeing across categories. And then lastly, how we are purchasing in light of what's important to us, right? Now, most of these issues skew younger. Interestingly, that the Made in the USA skewed a little bit older. And this is always one of those things that consumers rate very highly, but they don't necessarily really understand the implications. So that one is more important to older consumers, while sustainability and social causes are more important to younger consumers. As well as inclusivity in messaging and supporting minority-owned brands also skews younger. So, and we haven't seen, this has been important the last few waves of this study that we have done. So important to keep in mind when we're thinking about marketing to younger consumers. Okay, so as we wrap up here, we're almost at time. So just looking ahead in 2023 and beyond, I mentioned this idea of the reset year. So how do we make those, sorry, this was a cheesy headline, but I couldn't help myself, the accessories to necessities. we will expect to see retail remaining challenged in 2023. So really, that doesn't mean there can't be growth, but growth is going to be taking share from competitors, from other retailers, from other categories or other industries, because there is a finite amount of spend to go around. So that's why this is a reset year for many industries, brands, retailers. They're trying to figure out, what is the appropriate level of supply and demand. They're figuring out how to fix the inventory issues that have improved since last year. What is the right pricing? What are the right features that consumers are going to go after? Is it, are they going to move more casual versus dress? So I think, this is a real retooling year across the industry. How we shop, work, play, and take care of ourselves has changed, and consumers are placing priorities on other categories. So maybe within beauty or self-care, within home, some of the major home categories have slowed down, but, housewares is still strong. So maybe it's more about creating, these serene spaces than it is, buying new accessories that we're going to wear. So we just have to understand where the consumers are and try to fit into those lifestyles. So categories that align with these lifestyles and priorities are the categories that are going to win. And we have to think about performance beyond athletics. So in whatever your category is, think about what's your performance that you can highlight to the consumer, and how that's going to make, their life better by using or purchasing your products. And just very quickly, this is what I alluded to earlier, coming soon for accessories. We call it checkout. It is we have this in some other industries. It is a way of tracking the industry using consumer receipts that we scan. And so it's very accurate consumer reported data and can give us some tracking metrics. So just the basics, kind of like what I showed you earlier, but it also can go deeper and give us more analytics. So it can show us, how many consumers am I reaching? How often are consumers buying handbags or buying jewelry? What other categories or brands are they buying when they're buying mine or when they're not buying mine? And then we can do some more sophisticated buyer analytics, like a new loss retained, like, certain number of consumers bought my products last year or, at a retailer. But this year we lost buyers, but we also gained buyers. So what are the makeup of those customer groups, to really try to understand the analytics behind the consumer and those whys behind the buy. So we're looking forward to that, and we will be keeping you posted. All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll stop sharing. I know I'll just see you, Karen, but if there are questions or anything in the chat.
Well, we have a couple questions, and they're about handbags, but I will just mention again, because we had some people join late, that the annual recap that we usually put in Accessories Magazine will end up being in October, and it's because of some of this really cool information that is now coming. But I would check our magazines out in between, because we'll probably have some wisdoms from Beth and her team along the way. So keep following the magazine. If you love stats, you love information, we're going to have more of it. Beth, a couple questions that we got actually are handbag kinds of questions. And you had touched on the fact that the younger consumer wasn't carrying handbags. And our question has to do with do you count backpacks in that number? And if they're not carrying the bags, what indeed are they carrying?
Yeah. So, I mean, so I think here we considered a backpack to be a handbag. We kind of asked about that with those consumers. And when I look at bags, I do usually incorporate backpacks into that grouping. So yes, so that was one thing where we did see the younger consumer over index. And we also saw it was in like some of those smaller crossbody type items and slings and things like that. So it's really, and also, they may just be carrying their phones in their pockets in many times, because the phone is doing what our wallets and, a lot of what we would carry in our bags has done in the past. So I think we just need to, be aware of these kinds of trends.
Okay. The other question, it had to do specifically with sustainability in bags in that opening price point, $100, $250 range. But I must just broaden that then and just say how much of a factor is it, and does it matter across different age groups?
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing definitely more and more brands launch sustainability initiatives. I think, the accessories industry is definitely increasing their efforts there. And that's based on consumer demand. And, it's definitely tricky because it's hard to prove the return on investment immediately, right? But we do know that this is where consumers are moving and where the industry is going to need to move based on what we're learning out there in terms of climate. So, the younger consumer is definitely driving that interest in sustainability and actually teaching older consumers. So we're seeing many brands that maybe weren't originally, start to play in this space. And I don't have the specific details on the price points or, anything like that at this point.
Yeah, so for those who aren't with us on a regular basis, the council does pay attention to legislation and things that are happening around sustainability. And there are two things happening right now. I just want to interject.
Yes, please.
One is the New York sustainability law is currently, we're not talking about it right now. That doesn't mean it went away. It's, we expect that it will be reintroduced, and we've been working with groups like the CFDA and the AFA to make sure that of course, we all want to be sustainable, but we also need it to be executed in a way that we can actually, comply with the law without putting our companies out of business. And the FTC is reviewing the green guidelines. So they haven't updated guidelines for labeling things sustainable in about 12 years. That process is underway. Again, we working with our industry partners are trying to make sure that it's done in a way that is fair and even for our industry. Okay. I have a couple questions about jewelry. And I know that jewelry's kind of on the edge of what you do, but let's dive into a little bit, and maybe some of the bigger insights will help answer the questions. So one of them is, do you have any insights on what's happening in the jewelry industry? And that could be from, fine to fashion or different, different metals. What do you have in that category?
Yeah, I'm gonna probably just say that we'll have to kind of come back, and maybe when we do our report, look at this a little bit more. We don't, our tracking right now on jewelry is really very, very top line. It's a very hard category to track because you've got everything from the, out on the crafts fair, on the weekends to, your luxury jewelry. And it's very hard to get, a lot of those details. And we don't have actual retail data on jewelry. So those are going to be a little bit tougher questions for me to answer today.
Okay. I do think that some of the grander trends that you're seeing can help guide our jewelry designers and participants to work in materials and, look for places to sell their jewelry where the customer maybe. And then when we do that recap, we'll aim to have some more jewelry information included in that. Okay. Another question. What categories and items are included in personal accessories, belts, wallets, or do you also include hats, scarves, and gloves? Where do they come in?
So it depends on the data source that I'm using, but up at the very beginning, the small personal accessories is a little broader. So it is wallets, it's wristlets, it's money pieces, it's cell phone device protection. And then if I'm using some of our retail tracking data, it's more usually centered around the wallets and the wristlets, the money pieces, and not the cell phones. But it does not include belts, and it doesn't include what were some of the other items, or like the cold weather. That's separate, and also some areas that we don't focus on too much. Most of our accessories tracking, to be transparent, is mostly in the bags, luggage, and small personal in terms of wallets. And we have some of those other categories at a much higher level, but not a lot of detail.
Okay. Any demographic information, where a customer is, where they're living, East Coast, West Coast? Are you seeing any shopping trends?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing that that we're seeing more growth in some of the smaller cities. So the big cities have been slower to recover, and that is partly because the migration out of them, and also the lack of travel, and also the lack of people in them every day compared to pre-pandemic. So some of the smaller cities, like in the South, a lot of Florida, you know, if you read the migration stats, like Florida has had the biggest influx of population over the last couple of years. So we do see some areas in Florida outperforming. Same thing with, like, you know, some Georgia and Texas, you know, where people, smaller areas where people have moved to. So we're watching that because we think that, you know, the bigger cities are starting to come back, and travel is part of that. But for any specific categories, we can look deeper into some of those trends.
Okay. Erin, thanks you for an awesome presentation.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Wanted to know if you have any insight, and I think it's a wonderful question. Thanks, Erin, about the sustained growth in beauty compared to other categories.
Yeah, so beauty is, you know, part of it was just it was like accessories, it was one of the hardest hit during the pandemic. And then as we came out, people were looking, you know, people were coming back, they're going out, they're looking, you know, to kind of redo their look, the idea of like almost more of the natural beauty. It's also small luxuries for the most part, not that beauty items get, you know, to be pretty pricey, but in the grand scheme of things, it's sort of one of those small luxuries. But also the last thing is, I think social media has had a huge impact here. I mean, just the beauty videos on TikTok and other formats, the tutorials, the, you know, the referrals, the, you know, the product recommendations, and the beauty industry also has taken a lot of that, you know, function, or like the consumer end use to heart. So like some of the, you know, the names of products are about like what they do, as opposed to like, oh, this is just a pink lipstick. So, you know, it's a lot about, oh, this is your brow define, you know, this is what's going to do for you. And it's your, I'm not going to come up with the examples now because I haven't been as deep in that. But I was just like watching a video where I was thinking of that, like much more focused on what is the benefit and what is this product going to do than, you know, than how it's going to look. So I think there's been a lot of factors going into that, and it just continues to grow, and it's enjoyed the resurgence. You know, that's one where people are back in stores buying beauty because it's much more highly penetrated in store than online.
Great. Anybody else have any questions? All right. Accessories Council. Check your email. Our Mother's Day magazine will be out later today. Our ACE Award winners are going to be announced soon. If you're not a member and you want information on membership, we are doing some amazing events coming up. Most of them complimentary for our members, and hopefully we will get to see everyone in person very soon. Beth, thank you so much for an amazing presentation, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Karen.
Bye.